A Science of Change, podcasting by Gilmore Crosby, social scientist, author, and organization development professional since 1984. Hi, Gil Crosby. Happy to be with you again. And my extra special guest is Robert P. Crosby, my father, who has been with me for several podcasts. He's becoming my award winner for repeat conversations. And when your guest is 95, I am thinking that procrastination is probably a bad idea. So you may hear more from Father in the near future. And so this time it occurred to me that there are stories from his many experiences that aren't in books and that no one has ever heard, including me, possibly. And so we're just going to explore some of his more unusual work and see what we learn by doing so. And you may occasionally hear comments or laughter in the background from another special guest, my stepmother, Patricia, who is in the same room. I love you, Patricia.
Hello.
That's Patricia. Okay. So, Dad.
Yes.
Nice to have you with me again. And again, we're just recording off of your phone, my phone, because we're having a trouble on your end somehow with this podcast website. And so please, listeners, give us a little a break on that. This is the best we could do with the audio. And Dad, I don't know. I mean, what are some of your favorite stories from some of the work you've done outside of organizations, like the gay rights work you did in Washington State, maybe, or the student influence without anarchy at Gonzaga, or the psychiatric groups? I mean, anything that you'd be excited to talk about. That's what we're here for.
Well, certainly the work at Gonzaga was fascinating. I was hired as director of training. I don't know if any university ever had a director of training, but I was hired because Carl Rogers came to town with his encounter group movement and met with, I'm going to say, at least 100 faculty and students on the campus. And he basically led an encounter group with them. And many of them, a couple dozen, had been to encounter groups in California with him. And they wanted them to start on the campus. So he just said, yeah, I'll do that. And keep the groups to so many, 10 or 15, I forget the number. And they began, they wanted to know who would lead these. Well, you will. You've been doing encounter group. Now, we have in Leos, and certainly with my sons, Chris and Gil, we know very well that one's first impression of a T group as a participant can be very distorted. One can think you don't say anything, or one can think you say something confrontative and then shut up.
If you're the leader, if you're trying to lead it.
The leader, as a leader trying to lead.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, if you've only been to one group, you're going to lead the way you think that leader led, and which may be how they led, or maybe not at all what they intended if they were a skilled facilitator. So pretty soon Gonzaga began to experience a lot of problems, mainly because the so-called encounter leaders were, and the encounter movement came out of the training, basic skills training movement, or the T group movement that Kurt Lewin began in order to support his social, that which he was hired to do in, it was Connecticut, Gil, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
The fair employment in Connecticut. and it wasn't working. The work wasn't working until he invented the T group, which helped people then begin to deal with each other in the change agent team from let's say an area of a city where they were trying to make changes, or in a particular city. They would send a team, but the team squabbled. They didn't succeed until they started to learn about group process, learn how to be with each other in a non-blaming way, etc. Now, the translation to Gonzaga wasn't at all that. It was whatever these people who came to one, so now it's called Encounter Group by Carl Rogers.
Mm-hmm.
Person came, it was their impression. And so what was happening was basically that the leaders had thought that all this was, since they left feeling so great, they thought it was all just positive stuff and nice stuff you did and you didn't say much. And basically the students who came to these on campus or at a retreat center near campus would tell personal stories of their life. In other words, the encounter group was viewed as a place to, I'm going to say, spill your guts.
Mm-hmm.
Tell or about my divorce, or about my breakup with my boyfriend or girlfriend, or about my problems with my parents. Whereas the T group, in its origin with Kurt Lewin, and which Gil and Chris still carry out today, is about the interaction between the people who are present in the group. It's not about personal confession of past history. Now, there may be a tiny bit of that in what we call family of origin, but nevertheless, there's very little of it. And if it's done at all, it's done to enhance what just happened between you and me. We're having a conflict, and perhaps the trainer guesses that I'm really not dealing with you, I'm dealing with my dad. It would be neat for me to realize that and then come back and say, let's see what is going on here and now between you and me. So the T group is about relationships and understanding the systemic issues that influence relationships in the very group you're in. Whereas at Gonzaga, it became, as I had mentioned, a sort of a show and tell about personal confessions about life.
Mm-hmm. Sort of a loose therapy group where you're just talking about your past and so on, and
right,
and not talking about your immediate interactions.
Right, exactly, Gil. Without skilled therapists.
Right.
So they realized they were having problems. So they wanted to hire someone, and I was at that time. I was in NTL training, NTL and National Training Labs, which was begun by the, I'm going to say, students of Kurt Lewin.
Mm-hmm. Lippitt and Benet and Bradford.
Those three, yes. They weren't technically students enrolled, but students in the sense that they were with him and learned a lot from him and all that.
Sure, although Lippitt was a graduate student when he was first with.
Absolutely accurate. And he became my mentor for 3 decades, yes. And so so they hired me, which was kind of neat. Here's a Catholic university hiring an ordained Methodist clergyman to lead, to be the key person for the retreats that were really popular.
Uh-huh.
And there was just a lot of things wonderful about the whole hiring and the thing that I did there. I also taught a class in group process, which was basically a T group. But nevertheless, I came to the campus and began to work then with the president, because this was the time some of the older folks who are hearing this may remember when there was a lot of campus revolution going on.
So it was like what, 1969? Something like that?
Let's see, yeah, 69, 70, 71.
Uh-huh.
I was asked by a student leader to help him lead a session with students where about 150 students came. And all they did was yell and blame and stuff. And he wanted me to see if I would lead it and could change it, which I did. And I became very accepted by the student body. And then I planned a major campus event with the clear sponsorship of the president of the university, Father Tui. And that event involved 600 people, students and faculty. And if anyone wants to go further with it, it's written up in my memoirs. I think it's chapter 11, but one of the chapters there. And you can ask Gil for a free electronic copy, or you can get a bigger copy, in print from Amazon. But it's called Memoirs of a Change Agent. So in that, I chronicle what we did there. And I developed it with 600 people. We had 60 groups of about 10 people in a group. And they each had their own different subject depending on, what was a big issue for them. Like, for instance, freshman women wanted keys to the dorm. Simple issue, but important to them.
Yeah, it's amazing that they had to deal with an issue like that, but that was the type of issue women have dealt with in the United States.
1970.
Right.
Yeah. Anyway, there were a lot of major issues, and we ended up, I developed a booklet, which incidentally Jossie Bass later published. Actually, University, what was it? Associates, Pfeiffer's thing group. I don't have the first word quite right. But they published it and sold it for cities, this booklet. But I developed it for the students there so that each group was guided by the booklet. Everybody had a booklet, not even printed. It was run off on what we called mimeograph. Anyway.
I remember those.
Anyway, the point is that the groups were, while they had a designated leader, usually the person who was most burning about the issue, each group followed the booklet. And the booklet ended up with them developing a 1-minute presentation and choosing someone who would deliver it. And so at the end of, I'm going to say a couple days, my memoirs will be more accurate than my memory right now here. But
maybe
had this big, thing where hundreds of people gathered to hear 60 reports of 1 minute. It was a marvelous session.
And then
as Father Tui made his statement of a 12th century Norman law, that which I wish I would have looked this up before. But it was something like, that which affects all should be decided by all. Now, that's a little bit more radical than we were. We would say that affects all should be influenced by all. And then that there needed to be clear decision-making authority, which there was in this case. And then it was also developed, there was a follow-through session where the faculty or whoever each one of the 60 was aimed at would be at that meeting and give their response to the students and have dialogue. That was, I'm going to say, a month later or so.
Nice. Can I just say a couple things? So I've got I've got the memoirs here, and the exact quote was, "That which touches all should be decided by all." And I like your clarity about that's, we certainly encourage single point of decision making, and may or may not include getting input. It's wise to get input on many types of decisions, but not always necessary. Certainly the EMT doesn't need input, although, they may ask you questions, but you want the person flying the airplane to be making decisions. without a vote from the passengers. And so that was 1970. And so really what you did, Dad, as I get it, is you took what was unstructured groups that were where there was, some emotional distress and conflict and sort of chaos, and you turned it into a process where students were able to influence issues on campus, and where there was a clear structure for the leadership of the university to respond to the students and make decisions.
Yes, and the write-up of this appeared in the University of Cincinnati's little newspaper, with Warren Bennis was president of the University of Cincinnati, and he and I connected around that later on in life. But it was called Student Influence Without Anarchy. So anyway, I'm really proud of that piece of work.
Mm-hmm.
And it was off-center. I was working with manufacturing, with software firms, and this was not exactly that.
This was what brought you to Spokane then, primarily?
No. When I came to Spokane, because I had contracts in the Northwest, in Oregon, in Portland, in Alaska, in British Columbia, in Montana. And I just saw that Spokane was a hub for all those places. And so I moved the family to Spokane.
Okay. And so those were more traditional OD contracts?
Oh, yes, they were. I'm just thinking of what they were. Sort of. Yeah, they were more traditional. Yeah.
I mean, somehow you got, it's remarkable the way Spokane embraced you, that there was enough interest that you could start the Leadership Institute of Spokane as a just adult learning process, and people enrolled.
Oh, it was amazing. I had to have a living, so I named it Leadership Institute of Spokane. Bishop Jack Wyatt of the Episcopal Church, who was a T group trainer in the Episcopal Church, which was big on this. And Jack Wyatt is the one that, when I said I was going to name it Leadership Institute of Spokane, LIOS, which most people would have pronounced Lios, I think. He said, "Oh, Leos." And he and I both knew what he meant right away. In the New Testament, the word is Laos. Laos means the people of God. And so he was excited and he became chairman of my board. And the president of Whitworth became a member of the board, Ed Lindeman, a great futurist. He was a futurist with the U.S. Congress, a consultant with them.
They could use him now.
What?
They could use him now.
Boy, could they. But anyway, he was one who, this is another story, but I was invited to teach a month at Whitworth right soon while I was teaching at Gonzaga. In June, Whitworth had a summer session, and every day classes, and I taught the same stuff. And Ed Lindeman, I was taken to Ed Lindeman's office, and he asked me to start a graduate program. And he walked me down the hall, and within 5 minutes, without filling out pages and pages and pages of anything, we had a graduate program.
Nice. And we still do.
That's right.
Or at least we're in the process of resurrecting it.
Absolutely. And the thing that's fascinating about all these things was when I say Alaska, for instance. In Alaska, I was working with vocational education specialists from little towns all over Alaska. And we did a 2-week tea group. We had them work on how they were going to run their classrooms. We had practice sessions where they would practice a session with other participants, but that they were working on how they would go back to their little village and do that. And then we had follow-up sessions so that I got to visit a lot of little villages, as well as Juneau and Fairbanks. We did the training in Fairbanks. Jack Sherwood, I hired to work with me on that from Purdue University.
Mm-hmm.
And a guy named Bill Larson, who was an Episcopal priest and a psychologist, who I used a lot in my life. I used Jack a lot too. I would hire them to work with me on trainings.
Nice. That sounds a lot like the Connecticut workshop.
Oh, it does, doesn't it? Yeah.
At least in the intent to train people, they'd go back out to their communities.
Yeah.
You probably did better follow-up, but of course, Lewin passed away, shortly after. So
yeah,
who knows what would have come next?
That's right.
Certainly, the birth of NTL came next with T groups.
Well, whatever else, every situation was different enough that it demanded the application of certain design skills,
mm-hmm.
or certain things like helping people learn to do force field analysis with their issues, or having them have the experience of a T group, not just a T group. If they wanted to lead a T group, then I wanted them to have the experience of being led by many different T group leaders.
Mm-hmm.
There isn't one way it's led many ways, and each person has to find their own way of doing it.
That makes sense, although at this point, I'd say it's harder to find other T group leaders. So, so my approach to training T group leaders is to have them be in T groups and then to be with them while they're starting to lead and so on. I don't have such a vast network of T group leaders that it's easy for them to see other people lead.
Well, the problem is the T group just began to, I want to use the word melt, because
yes.
people weren't trained.
Yes.
But they were becoming permissive in the way they led the groups.
Yep.
And it led to this, what I in my memoirs again, I talk about personal confession versus openness. Openness being direct with the person or persons you're with about what's going on in you.
In the moment.
In the moment. Whereas, and incidentally, I developed that at Gonzaga.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because that's what it reminds me of, that there was, in the T group movement all over the United States and elsewhere, there were people leading it in such a way that it was more chaos than.
And a list contrasting personal confession with openness is in the memoirs. Now,
mm-hmm.
the personal confession was really just popular stuff. If you think about it, when a bunch of people get together to gossip, they talk about either their own personal problems. We had a woman talking to us last night about personal problems with her children and everything.
Right.
We were sitting in the lobby. She just came up and started to talk.
Mm-hmm.
People. And so, therefore, if they get in a group that's permissive, they just do the same thing. They don't learn anything new about how to be specific about what we call behavior description.
Right.
John Wallen's a whole other story there, which, again, I didn't start this to sell my memoirs. In fact, I hope everybody heard you can get it free electronically.
You're so generous. I hope some of you listeners buy it from Amazon so Dad gets a little bit out of it. But it's a great book.
Well, and I mentioned it there because of John Wallen.
Sure. John Wallen greatly sharpened the behavioral sciences.
Amazingly so. And we carry that tradition.
Indeed. Well, look, let me ask you, heading in a slightly different direction. Like, you have always been an advocate for certainly anyone who has less power in the United States. Certainly that has included and still includes Black people. So social justice for gays. And so in that quest, you've done some also amazing designs and interventions. And so would you be willing to talk some about the work you did on gay rights in Washington State?
Oh, that was a wonderful project. It just really was. I was hired by the state of Washington, the Attorney General's office, to do 5 sessions on gay rights across the state. So from Spokane to Seattle. And I have a picture of the woman, I can't remember her name now, that was, I think, an assistant to this Attorney General. And she was wonderful. And I was obviously hired because of my history. I was a certified sex educator, and I had the head of the Dorian Group, which preceded Human Rights Campaign, National Gay Task Forces, preceded those groups in the state of Washington as a gay and lesbian rights group. And so I always had him speak to the grad students, and I was developing a reputation as someone who supported gays and lesbians. My wife and I founded a school, an elementary and secondary school, and a lot of the students, I'm going to say a quarter of them, are gay or lesbian, and they came to the school, frankly, to find a safe place to go to school.
Yes, I attended that school, and you meant a lot, especially to the gay and lesbian students that came from small towns in eastern Washington and were seeking refuge.
And so I was hired, and at each meeting, well, they were slightly different, but basically, there would be about 100 people. They would walk in. I'd say 2/3 of them were fundamentalist Christians, distinguished at first by practically all of them brought their Bibles. They were all black covers, which was interesting. They would walk in, and then it became clear to me that I knew the people, so that the other third, friendly to or themselves gay or lesbian. Now, so the first task I had was to not have this be a shouting match.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I couldn't have, let's say, half the room or 2/3 of the room seated together and the other third seated together. So I do.
Although they probably would have picked that if they were left to their own druthers.
Well, they did at first.
Yeah.
When they walked. So I had to get them into new arrangements. And the new arrangement, I would make sure, depending on numbers, but let's say 6 to a group. It wasn't always that, it was 7 or 5. But anyways, 6 to a group. But I always wanted to make sure there were at least 2 in the group who were, let's say, positive about the gay and lesbian lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would set up boundaries for how they would talk for a little while as a group. I wanted them to get to know each other as much as they could through their biases and prejudices. And that was true on both sides, because all fundamentalist Christians aren't jerks, and all, of course, gays and lesbians aren't sinners or whatever however you think of them. So I'd get them to talk about something, and I can't recall, but it would be something that would help them to humanize each other.
Sure.
Rather than positions. And then we would start a general conversation. And the one thing that I was adamant about, and you won't about this, was I would not let anyone speak in blaming language. They had to describe or be specific about things. If they would say, well, gays influence children, I'd say, well, tell me about your experience when that happened. Well, most of the time they didn't have any such, or whatever. But if they made a claim, then I wanted them to support it with some specific suggestions. And then also to think about how that could have been misunderstood. And the whole meeting was about trying to get people to understand. Also, for the fundamentalist Christians, remember, I was a clergy. I had 4 years of seminary, 3 years where I got a master in divinity, and then I went to Boston University, got a master's in what was called sacred theology. But anyway, and then when I was on the national staff of the Methodist Church, when I was certified as a sex educator, because we were doing a lot of work with parents and children, junior high kids especially, but also high school kids, getting them together as around the United States to discuss sexual preference and what that was all about, and how to help a young person sort all this out and make sense out of it. And, getting parents to be talking to their kids about it. So I had a long history.
Still needed.
What?
That's still needed.
Oh, terribly needed. But so I had all that history that I brought to these sessions. And
of course, being a Methodist clergy, that probably helped some of the people who, think of themselves as Christians to give you a little bit of a benefit of a doubt.
For many of them, but not for all.
Yeah.
Because the liberalism tag on Methodist clergy, but but a lot of them were Methodists, and all Methodists aren't liberal. There's a lot are fundamentalists.
Sure.
But I knew the Bible.
Right.
So when they say Jesus was against gays, I say, well, where exactly? Of course, he never mentioned gays. But I would say, well, tell us where. Well, they would stumble around, and they couldn't remember, or nobody could remember. And there were, if there were 50 or 60 people with Bibles there, and none of them could know or remember where Jesus said these things they were claiming. But I wasn't telling them they were wrong. I was just saying, well, tell the rest of us the reference, Actually, in the scriptures, you can argue this a little, but not much. It's only one reference in the Hebrew scriptures, or what Christians often call the Old Testament, and only one reference in the Christian scriptures, or the New Testament, where you can make a case on this, on gay being a sin, gay relations or lesbian. Usually they focused on men, but anyway.
And in the New Testament, it wasn't allegedly Jesus that said it.
Not at all.
Yeah.
Oh, no, St. Paul's the one that mentioned this at one point. They couldn't pull stuff on me.
Sure.
The Bible. Because I knew the Bible better than most anybody in the room.
Right.
He knew the Bible forward and backward and upside down.
Well, I don't know about upside down, but anyway.
I tend to
but so I really loved those sessions, and the woman from the state who, you might say, sponsored them, not the way we use the word sponsor, but she was hostess of these meetings.
Sure.
She was just magnificent. But in order to do it, I had to do all the things I just said. You couldn't just have a shouting match.
What would you say the outcome was?
Well, the outcome's unknown. Did we influence anybody? Certainly, at that time, I don't believe, no fundamentalist Christian by the end of the meeting had the nerve to stand up and claim that Jesus said any of this stuff.
Sure.
So that's one positive outcome.
And they interacted, like Lewin says, just having people interact isn't enough. You have to have some structure. And you provided structure for them to have conversations that weren't just spewing, judgments at each other.
Right. And also a context that was important was that I was a clergyman. And I mean to the gay rights people, because they would have expected a clergyman to take sides, like
against them. Yeah.
So it would have been an outcome, positive outcome, that at least for them there existed a clergy. I think they realized it was more than one clergyman that was there.
Sure. It'd be tough. You'd have to have had like maybe a before sort of like questionnaire maybe, and an after, and maybe do follow-up, and tough thing to measure outcomes on. But it reminds me of the Riverfront Park. Maybe you have more to say about the intervention you just talked about, but the Riverfront Park was a citizens gathering, you could say, that you orchestrated, where there were clear outcomes.
Yeah, I did many such sessions. One where we did it for HUD with Susan Vernig and Bob Stilger of the Northwest Foundation. I would lead meetings, and we won an award from HUD for our community meetings where the citizens actually had the opportunity to distribute, like they would be told they'll have $600,000 for their area. How do they want to spend it? And here are the options. And, I would bring in experts, not to tell them what they should do, but to retrieve knowledge about, if you want to work on sewer systems, here's the problems you would face, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And here's the possibilities.
Mm-hmm.
But that kind of thing, or what you mentioned, the next steps for Riverfront Park, the World's Fair, was in, 64 or something like that? And
74. 76? Expo 74.
Oh, 74. Okay. Then a year later, I was hired to lead citizens in a session. And incidentally, one of my sons named Yul, that's you. Sat back there, and he has even written a page in the memoirs that I put in about I helped them to develop options, and there were 5 options developed. In fact, we have a video of it yet. It was a slide set. But Patricia and I have here a video that we can put on DVD and watch those options. And those options were distributed all over the city to high school groups, college groups, Rotary clubs, just church groups. And then they would vote. It was a non-binding vote. But the development of them was done by citizens, with each group having an architect loaned by an architectural firm to draw pictures. And in some cases, we had actual pictures. But mostly it was artist drawings, and they were very good. And then it went through the whole city, and then I reported to the Parks Board. But it was highly contentious. And there was one group, and this was important. You sat there and heard one group just chew me out every week. They spewed hate at me, and they were the liberals. Because they only wanted one thing, and they didn't want any other option. And they were mad at me because they thought because I allowed other options, that I actually supported one that they hated, and which never had a chance. That was crazy. The reason I say never had a chance, it was a professional parks group that would come in and build a world-class park, amusement park for Riverfront Park, which the year before, the citizens in Spokane had solidly voted down. But there was a group came in and still wanted to do that. So that was an option. And just meeting after meeting, the liberals would come after me. It was, you'd hear me, I would listen to them for a little bit, and I say, okay, now we're going to break into our 5 groups and get to work. Oh, God, that was a great project. It really was.
I think it was my first OD project, although you had that Contadina tomato processing work around the same time and some other gigs when I first started with you. But they were very upset. And you patiently would hear them and paraphrase and for a bit, and then when for whatever magic you had, you said, okay, now let's get going, and they would work.
Oh, that was wonderful. Yeah.
It's the only OD work I've ever done where I don't think I got paid with that. I think I joined you. You already had your budget and everything, and but it's the only OD work I've ever done where I rode around a city on my bicycle and distributed the slides to libraries and.
Oh, did you do that?
Yeah, I did. I was heavily involved in the distribution and the collecting votes and went to assisted living facilities. And and then we had on cable TV in the school system for teenagers, I think it was.
Well, see, and contrasted, you mentioned Contadina.
Uh-huh.
Where you did do a significant piece of work that in a way I threw you into, like throwing you into swim in the water.
Yes.
And you did great. But it was a classic, what I call a classic OD intervention. It was survey feedback from the top to the bottom of the organization. All employees were able to influence the outcomes. And it's the kind of thing I did at several nuclear plants, at many manufacturing plants. It's what I call OD, classic OD.
It was a great structure, and all I had to do was, I had to have some knack for interacting with the people, of course, even though I was only 24. But mostly I just had complete faith that if I listened to you and did what you told me to do, it would work.
Yeah. Did it, and it was amazing. And action research, it was action research.
Yes, it was
spelled out in survey feedback.
Yep. The hourly workers got to think about what was in the way of things getting done and come up with their own solutions, and the supervisors in each layer had done that. And
in all cases, we made it clear the difference between influencing and deciding.
Mm-hmm.
Who decides.
Yep.
But also said that if the decider isn't deciding a percentage of what the recommendations are, then we're going to have trouble in River City.
Yeah, and I think you just said high percentage. The voice got distorted for a second, so I'm just repeating that.
Yeah, well, as I've said, where I would tell people 80% of what you recommend will be confirmed, and that'll become an action. And if it doesn't, then we need to work that further.
Yep, and in all the years since, it's usually a higher percentage than that, actually, that by the time it goes through the whole process.
You mentioned a couple other things. We didn't talk about the juvenile court. I was hired we're going to build a whole new court. And so I was hired to lead that citizen program. And what we did was I had about 40 citizens in that, and I would organize them, and we located, just for one example, at the entrance to this court, when kids come in, what's an ideal situation? How should it be built so that the kid comes into not like a prison,
mm-hmm.
but a facility where he's going to be cared for, she is. And so let's say we located it in Minneapolis. There was one that was rated as just outstanding. Well, then I'd send a team of 4 people there, or 3 or 5, to Minneapolis, and their job was to retrieve knowledge. They could take pictures. Their job was to come back and give the knowledge. Their job was not, and I emphasize the word not, to come back and tell people what they should do
mm-hmm.
in Spokane, but to retrieve knowledge. And then the people in Spokane that they were reporting to, their job was to derive implications. In other words, as they heard the story of Minneapolis, they were to say, what would work here? What would we like here in Spokane? So you never had this thing of somebody coming and saying, you should do this, and then other people saying, it'll never work here. You didn't have that pushback because the people in Spokane, which of course the team was from Spokane, but the people in Spokane were hearing this information and saying, "Oh, I'd like to see us do that here, or a little slightly different, something like this, or whatever."
Mm-hmm.
And we did that with all facets of the development, and then had architects in to tell them what we were suggesting. And the architects would interact with us rather than the architects telling us that there was a certain way we should do it.
Mm-hmm.
It was called, adapt. Patricia just wrote it down. Adapt, not adopt. Don't adopt a practice from Minneapolis. Adapt it.
Yes, and of course that is influenced heavily by CRID, knowledge retrieval implication derivation, that your mentor Lippitt generated in his work, which is really based on action research. Back to Lewin.
Exactly. He and his grad student Chick Young. Yeah.
Yep. How you let the local people influence appropriately.
That's right.
And you're going to have more effective implementation in almost anything.
Right.
If you really know how to structure that. Well, there's a lot more that I'm curious about, and maybe someday we'll have a conversation just about social action you were involved in, starting way back in the even as a teenager, you were fighting against segregation in your own community there in near Pittsburgh.
Right, and also about the work with the psychiatrist Jan Bertram van Stolk, who was Albert Schweitzer's chief surgeon, but became a psychiatrist in Edmonton, and we worked together for years with couples and applied a lot of these principles. And what was the other thing that was pretty amazing? Oh, I know, the work at the psychiatric hospital.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So how much energy you got?
Oh, I got a little more.
Well, how about just saying a little bit about the... What's that?
I was going to say you could save all those for another podcast.
Well, that'd be okay with me. I'll just say briefly, in your memoirs, you talk about the work with the in the psychiatric inpatient facilities, and having this with structure. The patients were running their own groups, and that led to more successful discharge, where they would stay out of the hospital longer. I'm not sure what the measures were, but...
Oh, yeah, well, where they could go out into the community and not come back.
Exactly. Right.
Yeah.
And the couples work perhaps does deserve not that doesn't deserve a longer conversation, but because there was the workshop you and I were talking about the other day, SARB, and that was that with the psychiatrist you mentioned?
No, that was when I moved to Spokane, I needed a way to make money, so I started the Leadership Institute and advertised it through brochures that I would deliver door to door all through the area. I would have workshops, and one of them was called SARB, Sex, Affection, Romance, and Bonding. And I only charged $1 to come to that, but I would have 100 people.
Uh-huh.
So that was pretty good. I'd make $100 for a 2-hour session or 2.5.
Uh-huh. Which was more back in those days. Plus, you created a buzz or a network of people that knew of you.
Right, and then they were interested in what else are you doing and all this kind of stuff.
Right, and just talking about the process of that workshop might be fun in a future session.
That'd be great, yeah.
Well, look, Dad, I think that's enough for today, and I really appreciate you being willing to do this.
Well, it's wonderful for me, and what I realize is that every circumstance had its own twist. So even though we were able to use action research, survey feedback, that was a major normal way to do at least organization development in manufacturing and nuclear and plants.
At least normal for you. I mean, there were other people doing similar stuff, but you were a trendsetter around having the data actually go to each work group and having them work their own data.
Oh, right.
I wouldn't call that normal in general.
Oh, wow. Okay. Anyway, yeah, there's all that. But then other circumstances, many of which we've just discussed, they demanded twists,
Sure.
Different approaches, etc. And we talked before about macro and micro and how you get prepared for that in previous podcasts and in my memoirs. Yeah.
Sure, which is at least making sure that there's clear decision-making structures.
Right, ahead of the thing, yeah.
Yeah, so when you worked on the park project, for instance, that the citizens knew that was the park board still would have to decide based on their input.
Exactly. In fact, I remember at one of my meetings, somebody saying, well, the park board's just going to decide this, or the city council, whoever it was. And he grabbed the mic and, screamed into it, said, Dad, what's the use of us doing this? And I took the mic then when he was done, and I said, well, thank you. You're exactly right. The park board is responsible for the final decision. You're exactly right. Our job is to come up with recommendations that they can consider, and then there will be a session a month after the decisions made by the Parks Board or City Council, whichever group was responsible. There will be a meeting a month later where you can have a face-to-face with them about what decisions they made.
Yeah, didn't you also say something like, look, if it turns out they reject the decisions, the advice, especially the advice that the majority of the citizens supported, I'll help you organize your protest of that or your...
I did. I said, if you don't like what they did, well, then I'll help you organize for next steps to combat that decision.
Mm-hmm.
And the city council, I say the group responsible, say the Parks Board,
right?
Heard me say all that. I told them I was going to say that. See, that's macro planning.
Yep.
However, I could lead it micro, like helping people discuss better or whatever.
Sure. Or even dealing with people being angry at you.
Yeah, that's a micro thing. I do that.
Mm-hmm.
Macro is setting the whole thing up. So I have a context that I believe is going to be a fair context.
Mm-hmm. And then describing that to people.
Absolutely.
Dad, you have had a marvelous career.
Thank you. And
I know there's many people who are grateful to you, as am I.
Thank you, son.
And so that's a wrap on another lovely conversation. Thank you so much, and thank you for listening. And there will be more. So tune in and take care.
Love you, Gil.
Love you too. Bye. Hey, I appreciate you listening. This, again, is Gil Crosby. And I want you to take advantage of what's available to you. I have many free materials. I am happy to talk to people about their situations, especially if you're trying to create change, either social change or organization change. We have frequent workshops that are available, T group workshops. If you have never been in a T group with us, then don't miss it in your life. Many people have said to me, of all the trainings I've ever received, I got this one 30 years ago, and it's the only one that stuck with me. You're learning from your actual interactions with the other participants and with the faculty. The faculty are walking the same talk that they're teaching of behavioral skills. It's a training workshop. That's what the T stands for. This is done in the spirit of the creation of T groups by Kurt Lewin and his associates. It's for groups. It's for teams. That's how it was originally designed. It is a opportunity to learn about theory and put it directly into practice. Again, the original design, you learn things and then you put them into practice. It was not just all ambiguity, which is how some T groups, most are led today, where the faculty hardly says anything. That's not how this is designed. So join us for that. There's always workshops. There's the Leadership Institute of Seattle, which has certificate programs, a two-year program where you will learn from T groups and learn how to do all the organization development work that my father designed, most of it, and I continue that practice alongside my brother Chris and many other associates. So don't be a stranger. There's a lot going on. It's always changing. So be in touch, and it's on the website, crosbyod.com. I look forward to working with you in your organization or as you pursue things like reducing gun violence and decreasing racism in our society. Whatever your goals are, the social science of Kurt Lewin guides how to achieve those goals in a reliable way. And so that's what I apply and practice every day and invite you to.